Welcome to Kiffin's Keep, an intellectual resource for the pillar and buttress of the truth, which is the church. This is a project of the London Lyceum, which is dedicated to serious thinking for a serious church. I'm Jordan Stefaniak, president of the London Lyceum and host of Kiffin's Keep. And before we get started, just a reminder, if you're new to the show, go ahead and click subscribe so that you can get all the episodes right into your inbox. You'll get these, plus you'll get our other show, Generally Particular, and you'll get anything that's generally related to the London Lyceum, our roundtables, and other related live shows. So all sorts of great content about serious thinking is going to be right there available to you. So make sure, hit the subscribe button. And if you wouldn't mind, hit the like button on these videos as well. That encourages me, helps me to know which videos are most helpful to you so that I can focus on them. And as a reminder, before I jump into this one, at the very end of this episode, if you watch all the way through, which I imagine those people who are serious about listening to these things will get there, I'll talk a little bit about some of the ideas that I have for upcoming episodes, and you can comment about those if you'd like. I imagine those who are new listeners, I don't want to spend that time up front. I want to get right to the topic, which is what I like to do in most of these episodes. So, topic for today, talking about resurrection. So, it's useful. I should probably start baseline definition of resurrection. When I'm talking about resurrection, I'm talking about a dead person being brought back to life. So this would contrast from things like, what's something else? Reincarnation, where someone dies, they come back to life, but they are in a numerically distinct body. It seems like you could be, reincarnated from a human to a mouse, or from a human to a crocodile, or from a crocodile to a gorilla. You are still alive in some sense, that you still have this personal identity, but that physical body that you had is not necessary for your life to come back. Whereas in resurrection, particularly Christian resurrection, it seems that you must have the numerically identical body that died, that is rotting in the grave or whatever, is picked up out of the grave, and voila, you are back alive. So a common example would be Lazarus. Lazarus dies, he's in the tomb, he's raised, and it's resurrection because he was dead, complete cessation of life. It doesn't really matter what sort of take you have on when life ultimately ends. I know science has several different accounts for when cessation of life is ultimately done, but let's just say irreversible. When it gets to the point of irreversible death, you no longer can come back by any natural means. Lazarus, in this case, is dead. He's wrapped up in the tomb. There's no coming back for him. Jesus raises him from the dead. That's a resurrection. That's not a reincarnation. It's not as if Jesus walked up there and told Lazarus, come out of your tomb, and he came out as a mouse, or he came out as a crocodile, or something else. He came out with that same exact dead body that's there, is now alive once again. You could take the examples that you read in the Gospels when Jesus rises from the dead, or I guess is it before he rises from the dead, where I think it's in Matthew, where there's this account where these a bunch of people come up from their graves and they start visiting people around Jerusalem and everywhere. That would be an account of resurrection, because that same dead body that was in the grave rises, and that's what's maintaining sort of that personal identity in some sense. So maybe you have a question at this point of like, why do I need the same body? Why can't I have a different body or something else like that? And I've written some related to this, and it's been published in International Journal of Philosophy of Religion. I'll drop a link to that essay below. I'm not going to cover everything I cover in that essay. So that essay is primarily designed to defend one model of resurrection. It's not just generally talking about resurrection completely. So it's not just like giving you a sort of straightforward account like I'm trying to do somewhat here. However, it does have some sections and chunks that I think are useful, that I'm drawing on to some degree as I talk about this. So you can go check that out. I had an awesome title for it, but I asked other people and they thought, yeah, maybe that's not the best title, because I got one of the reviewers said they didn't like the title. So I put in there, the title was Why So Serious? Resurrecting Van Wagen's simulacrum theory. And the Why So Serious, the editor did, or I guess not the editor, the blind reviewer didn't know what that meant. I explained that it was from Batman and from Joker being Why So Serious. And the reason I did that was because everybody's kind of like doesn't take Van Inwagen seriously, and they also posit some serious problems with his view. And I say, well, what? They're not really so serious. Why so serious? And I thought it was going to be awesome to have Batman, but here we are. We don't have it, so it's not that cool. What's the title? I think Resurrecting Van Inwagen's Simulacrum Theory or something. You'll see in the notes. So, as I was saying, what is resurrection? Okay, why do we need the resurrection of the same body? So there's a couple of reasons, and one of them I think is already pretty clear, is just the definition of what we mean by resurrection. If we take out the necessity of the same body, it doesn't seem like it's really resurrection anymore. If you can be reincarnated or something, then that's reincarnation, not resurrection. If you are given a numerically distinct, in every sense, body, maybe it's qualitatively identical, but everything is truly distinct. So Van Inwagen has this example of, it's very common, I think, a child, take your child, son, daughter, they build a tower of blocks, okay? Another kid comes over and knocks the whole thing down. They cry, they fight over it, whatever. You come back and say, you know what? I'm going to fix this tower of blocks. I'm going to build it exactly the way you built it, and I'll do it for you. And done. And Van Inwagen asked, whose tower really is that? And most people, I think, would come to that and say, well, in some sense, it's the daughter or the son's tower, but in reality, that's actually the father's tower who came and built it back together, even if it's qualitatively indistinguishable. That's the Father's work there. So in the same sense, if you died, your body's disintegrated, whatever, and God just says, you know what, to resurrect you, all I need is just to create a body that looks like what it used to look like. It doesn't have to have any of the same connections in any sense to who you were. I'm just going to, poof, magically create a body that's indistinguishable. And that's resurrection. I think most people would say, no, I don't think that's resurrection. That's something that's distinct from resurrection. That's recreation. That resurrection is supposed to be taking the same thing that was dead and bringing that back to life. Curious at this point, questions, thoughts? Do you have comments? Do you disagree? Do you agree? Drop them in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you guys. I'm always learning with this. So sometimes I'm workshopping some ideas, and sometimes I'm talking about stuff I've written. And I know that I'm not infallible. I make mistakes all the time. So I learn a lot. I'm amazed at how much I can learn from people on the internet and everywhere. You have access to all sorts of cool people that have insights that you wouldn't normally have. So I've personally benefited from it. So if you have thoughts or questions or disagreements, I'd love to hear your comments here. Another reason to say that resurrection requires the self-same body is because that's the sort of language that you find in several important Protestant confessions. So if you look at, I've saved this somewhere, yes, Belgic confession, in Article 37, it says, their spirits being joined and united with their own bodies in which they lived. And so I think by linking resurrection to the bodies in which they once lived, that's saying it requires the self-same, actual same body, and not just a qualitatively the same, but really distinct in some sense. It has to be the same one. Westminster Confession of Faith also says this in section 33:2. It says, all the dead shall be raised up with the self-same bodies, and none other, although with different qualities, which shall be united again to their souls forever. So it seems to also say there is something about that old dead body that must be brought forth and united back to the soul. And you see a similar argument in other confessions. So in the Anglican 39 Articles, in article, it's Roman numerals, it's IV, what is that, 4? It says, Christ did truly rise again from death and took again his body, with flesh, bones, and all things appertaining to the perfection of man's nature. The Catechism of the Catholic Church says the same thing with Christ. And the reason that's necessary, and I think this is a scriptural reason too, is because Christ had to have that numerically same body. It had to be the same one for resurrection to actually be there. And then the 39 Articles and the Catechism of the Catholic Church links our resurrection to that same sort of resurrection. I think everybody is going to say Jesus has to be resurrected with that same body that was crucified and hung on the cross. If we want to say it's a different body, it's a completely new created one, that's going to cause all sorts of theological problems. It has to be the one that actually died and actually hung. That's the one that came back to life. And if we link our resurrection to be like his resurrection, that then therefore entails that our resurrection must need the same body. So I think you have theological warrants, I think you have confessional warrants, and I think you have just basic definitional warrants. But what fundamentally does resurrection of that same body require? There's all sorts of different accounts. Most of them, I think, if you look through the history of the church, are going to tilt towards some sort of reassembly model. And a reassembly model just being certain particular parts of your dead body are brought back together, reassembled. So sort of like the Ezekiel vision of the valley of the dry bones, where they're kind of brought back together in some miraculous sense. I don't know why it reminds me of Lord of the Rings, the Return of the King with all the dead. I need to read it again, apparently. With all the dead people, and Aragorn comes and gets them. It's not an exact parallel, but for some reason, that's what always comes to my mind. The idea just being everything's, the sinews, the joints, all this stuff suddenly gets put back together, reassembled, boom, that is that person. So then you have to ask, well, what is it fundamentally that's making that your same body? And there's all sorts of different accounts of this, I think. You don't want to just say it's every single piece of matter, because then you're going to ask, well, is it all the pieces of matter from when you were 10 or from when you were 30 or from when you were 50? Maybe you would say, well, it's all the stuff that you had at the end of your life. But then you still run into sort of problems. What happens if when you die, your body disintegrates and some of it becomes part of an apple tree? And so part of you at the end of your very life is now inside this apple. Another Christian comes along, takes a bite of this apple. That piece of you now goes into them. They die the next day. And we have pieces of matter that need to be resurrected from two different people that are shared, but there's only one piece. Let's just say it's one piece, and it was shared by two different people right at their death. Then what do you do? So I don't think you can go that route. There's other options. I'm not totally sure what the appropriate option is. I think there's ways you can go about it and say, yep, that seems like that's a valid, appropriate way to do it. Maybe it's this way, maybe it's that way. I'm not totally sure, but there's options that are not incoherent and not inconsistent. I think one of the probably most promising routes is to say that there's some sort of kernel. So I think this is the language that you find in 1 Corinthians 15 with Paul, where the Apostle Paul is talking about resurrection and talking about this naked kernel. So maybe it's just a really small part of you that is sort of like that essential piece, and that is what constitutes the continuity from the dead body to the resurrection. Maybe there's some special way. So Van Wagen sort of like does this simulacrum stuff where God like takes whatever this essential part of your body is and stores it away so that you have some sort of causal connection. So it's no longer material that's being the part that's persisting your identity. It's this causal sort of connection that's maintaining that. And that's maintained because God keeps it and stores it. I don't know the right answer. I just know that I think there are good ways to go about it and less good ways to go about it. I think at the bottom of all of this, though, is a necessity of the bodily resurrection. You don't have a Christian doctrine of resurrection without that same body. This isn't to say that you have to be a materialist. This isn't to say that you have to reject all forms of dualism, whatever. No, it's just saying that if you want to affirm a Christian doctrine of the resurrection, you need the same body, which does put significant more pressure on your own theological coherent picture of what it means to be a human person than would be there otherwise. I think there's a lot of like sort of Cartesian dualist leaning people or idealist leaning people that think they can get it off scot-free and miss a lot of the challenges that come with things like this. But I think you still have those, even if you take those routes of models of the human person. So I just think resurrection requires the same body. Do you agree with me or not? There's other models. So like, for example, Lynn Rudder-Baker, for her constitutionalist model, she basically says resurrection, you just have a completely new body. To me, that's recreation. That's not resurrection. And there's other people who account for resurrection in particular ways, but I think they're equivocating on what we're talking about. So we need to get clear just on what resurrection means, what it entails. And if we look at Jesus, I don't see how you can get around the reality that you need the exact same body that hung on the cross. If we get rid of that, that introduces just way too many theological problems. So anyway, that's a little bit about the resurrection. I thought this might be fun. It's sort of an introduction into what resurrection means, some of the different accounts, some of the problems that are there. I think it's a very fruitful area. And I think when you end up requiring the body for resurrection, that can have sort of like moral, metaphysical sorts of implications in other senses. Now, if you listen this far, apparently you like Kiffin's Keep. I want to mention a couple of things. First, if you have things you'd like me to cover in these videos, let me know. Drop a comment. I'm happy to try to put together a video on something that you're interested in. I don't always know what everybody's interested in. I sort of talk about things that I'm interested in or things that I see. I actually know a little bit about this subject and people seem to be interested in it, and I'll try to do something related to that. But I don't always know, so like if there's something you really actually want me to talk about, just please drop a comment so that I know that. And you can do that anytime on any episode. I check all the comments just to keep up with stuff. Can't promise that I'll always be able to do it because I try to only talk about stuff that I actually have something to say about. I don't have something to say about everything. I have opinions about a lot of stuff, but those will be aired and expressed in the appropriate context because I think that's what you should do. I shouldn't be talking about lots of stuff that's popular nowadays that I just don't know what I'm talking about. I definitely don't want to publish it on a video. So some things I did think that I've been planning on putting together some videos on are some bad reasons to no longer be a Baptist. So I've heard all sorts of ideas, reasons that people stop being a Baptist, and almost invariably I say that's a bad reason. So I've thought about putting together a couple of episodes. Maybe it's just one episode, I don't know, on bad reasons. Two other things that I've thought about is stuff related to classical theism, just because that's a great interest of mine and one that I've done a lot of research in, and I'm writing a book in that's due later this fall, a manuscript on just an introduction to it. So I've thought about trying to talk a little bit about that in this format. Another thing that I've been doing a little bit of reading on is this sort of idea that there is a SCOTUS virus that infects everything downstream. He's this generator of nominalism and univocity and whatever other bad boogeyman catchword that's out there, and that infects all the bad theology, and all the good theology stays away from SCOTUS. And I've wanted to, I think, put together maybe an episode or a video on that and why I think that's a false narrative. It's historically naive and inaccurate, and among other things. So if any of that stuff sounds really interesting, drop a comment so that I know to prioritize it, to do the work on it. Some of these things, if I haven't done prior research on it, I do try to read and think and put together at least some sort of outline as I talk. So there's been probably a couple of these episodes where I have no outline whatsoever, but most of them I try to put together at least some coherent outline just to keep me steady, so that I talk about stuff that's relevant and important and don't go off on rabbit trails. Maybe you guys would like rabbit trails. I don't know. Maybe there's a Q&A episodes that you want where we just kind of hang out and talk live about random stuff. I don't know. You tell me. Drop a comment if you got something. I've had fun doing these. It is a lot of work. I have thought about pulling back a little bit and maybe doing 2 to 3 episodes a month instead of 4 a month where I've been doing weekly. Pulling it back just because I want these to actually be useful and fruitful and not just doing a video to do a video. I do plan on making sure that I have at least one every other week. But I have thought about maybe the 2 to 3 a month is the appropriate amount for me. I don't know. You tell me again in the comments. I'd love to hear from you guys. Let me know. This has been a lot of fun. This has been Kiffin's Keep. Thanks for thinking with me. I'll talk to you guys soon.